Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So this video is another video I've done with Dr. Mark Caldwell. I'm sure you're all well aware of him by now. So this one was an interview we did over breakfast. It goes on for quite a while, so I've broken it down into a couple of separate videos. So be sure to check out them when I upload them, hopefully later in the week. But this is the first part. Fascinating story, how Mark got into farriery, his time in the army, and even before that, his time floating around California, not really knowing what he was going to do, to the end where he becomes one of the leading names within the industry. So, a fascinating story. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. Okay guys, I'm here with Dr. Mark Caldwell. I thought I'd take this opportunity to just have a sit down. We're having a coffee together over breakfast here. And I thought we could just do a little interview with Mark and just sort of get his perspective on farriery, his career so far. Very fascinating man. He certainly inspires a lot of farriers across the world. I'm certainly one of them. So thank you for that, Mark. But I'd also like to know, can you just introduce yourself and just give a little bit of a backstory to what got you, well, not really what got you here, but what got you started in farriery, you know, where did you come from?
Well, hi, I'm Mark Caldwell. How did I get started in farriery? Well, it's really a funny story. I was in the army, in the household cavalry, and it was during the Queen's Jubilee celebrations back in the 70s. And I was on Queen's Lifeguard on what they call the rear party, so we were day on, day off, day on, day off, polishing kit, fucking dressed up like a Christmas tree, doing parade, and then on the day off you were mucking out horses. There was you had to work weekends as well, mucking out horses. There was no time off while they were doing around doing all these celebrations. And then it was these guys in the forge, and they kind of worked from 8:30 in the morning till 3:30. They had Wednesday afternoon off, so-called sports afternoon, although there was not a lot of sports going on. They worked one weekend in 8 instead of every weekend. They did one night duty in 8 instead of every other bloody night. And there was a vacancy, and I stuck my hand up, and that's how I got into farriery. I had no particular interest in the craft. I don't come from a background of that. It was just a way of getting out of doing the polishing and the bullshit that's associated with being on the Queen's Lifeguard. And so I went on the course, and as it happened, I was reasonably successful on the course. I did all right at it. But I still wasn't motivated in terms of farriery. It was just a job. And then when my time was up in the cavalry, I didn't want to sign on again, and I still wasn't particularly interested in shoeing horses. You know, I could do it, but it didn't float my boat. So I trotted off to California for 3 years. In 1978, and I went beach bombing on Malibu Beach and smoked pot and yeah, all that kind of stuff. And then in 1981 my grandfather died, and I was very close to my grandfather, and I had to come home, and I was really skint. I just had the amount of airfare to get on Laker Airways. So I came home and I need to earn some money. What am I going to do? And all I had was this box of tools that I'd had when I was in the army, so I thought, oh no, I'll trim and shoe some horses. But I had no stock or anything, so I put an ad in the local Farmer's Guardian and just to do trimming. And within a week I was manically busy. I had enough money to buy a gas forge and an anvil and get some stock, and I started shoeing some horses. And I still, you know, I was interested enough in it to try and do as good a job as I could do at the time, but I wasn't really motivated by it. You know, there was no ulterior thing about trying to improve what I do or anything about the health and welfare of the horse or anything. But in 1984 I went to the Three Counties show with 2 friends of mine, a guy called Andy Cole, who's no longer here, and a bloke called Steve Sargent, and they'd gone competing at the Three Counties show, and I'd gone for the day out, and there was a spare foot, so I had to go. I managed to get through it in the time. I didn't do particularly well. And to this day, I don't know what it is that happened, but something during that hour sparked me. And I realised that if I actually applied myself to this job, I could be quite good at it. So from there on, I kind of went a little bit puddled. I went to every competition that was going. I stuck myself down for my AW. I passed my AW in the October of '84. Carried on competing through the 80s. And then in 1986, I had a client whose pony had been referred to Liverpool University for laminitis, and there was a vet there called Robert Eustace. Some of you will have heard of him, and he'd read some paper somewhere that he'd seen about Bernie Chapman putting these heart bars on and dorsal hoof wall resections. So he'd had a heart bar fabricated by the local engineering shop, and he had that bashed on, and he'd taken to the front of this hoof capsule with a grinder. And this poor pony was really sore after the process, and my client was really quite distressed. And I kind of needed to remove the shoe because it was on in the wrong place, one thing and another. And she was really distressed about me having to take the shoe off and how she was going to explain it to this vet. And I said to her, well, look, don't worry about it. You're going on Monday or whatever the day was. I'll come with you and I'll explain to him why I'd removed the shoe, why I needed to refit it, because I'd previously been to a Bernie Chapman lecture and I understood a little bit about the process of heart bar shoeing. And so when I got there, poor old Robert went nuts at me, interfering with his case and all the rest of it. But anyway, thankfully the pony was okay. But the following day the phone rings about 7:30 and it's Robert Eustace. And he says to me, right, smart ass, I've got this laminitis that's just come in. I want you here by 9 o'clock and see if you can do any frigging better. And that was exactly what he said to me, you know. And me and Anne Claxton, because I was working with her at the time, we said, come on then, we'll go and we'll see what this is all about. So off we went. And we shot the horse, and Robert and I got on like a house on fire. And so we shot the horse, it went well, fortunately, and so we ended up doing a couple more, and then he really got into research into the clinical aspects of laminitis. So he kind of founded the first kind of laminitis centre, and that was really like at Liverpool. And so I started working with him and doing research, and then I went off and spent some time in Texas with the Chapmans. Bernie Chapman, who's again is dead, unfortunately, was a real hero of mine and a gentleman, and every bit of information he ever had he gave to you know, and it was a real privilege, and I learned an awful lot, not just about laminitis, but about horses' feet, and in particular the relationship of the internal anatomical structures to the feet, and how the feet distort in terms of their form and their shape, but this internal anatomy is dictating this, either the well-being or the distortion. And in particular with laminitis, it's really evident that the hoof capsule is kind of distortion around the skeletal structure. And so that sparked off a bit more interest in trying to understand the relationship of the effects of conformation in the anatomy on the hoof. And from there I decided that I was going to try and take my fellowship, and that I did a scientific study through cases at Liverpool on horses that exhibited signs of navicular disease, and then those that were actually physically diagnosed with navicular disease through a full lameness workup, excuse me, which included local anaesthesia, diagnostic imagery, radiographs at the time, all the new stuff wasn't really available. And so I wrote this thesis, some of you may have heard of it, pre-navicular syndrome. And my hypothesis was that because the hoof capsule distorts under different pressures, that this distortion may be indicative of a predisposing set of circumstances that will bring about the pathology of navicular disease. In other words, there was a pre-navicular situation that you could read and interpret as this horse was likely to progress onto the pathology. I took my fellowship in the October of 1987 and was fortunate enough to pass that, unfortunately at the second attempt. But that interest in being able to read and interpret the form of the foot and try to relate that to the internal anatomy and the strains and stresses that it was under stayed with me. And so from there I then was involved in a business with Alan Caldwell and Anne Claxton, Brooks Lane Smithy, and we brought in all sorts of farriery based sort of solutions and marketed them as a way of trying to subsidise me doing this research into foot distortions. Over time and through the 90s, the business end of it overtook the horseshoeing side of it, and so there wasn't a lot of time to be able to continue that research until 2001, 2002, when I was approached by Myerscough College to see if I would do a day or 2 days a week in their new teaching program. They were just about to embark on training apprentice farriers, and they needed a hand in putting together the syllabus of the course, and were looking for somebody with the necessary qualifications to teach apprentices the practical aspects of it and the farriery theory. So I took on that role, but unfortunately the guy who'd originally asked me, a gentleman called Ron Jones, died of cancer, so that 1-2 day role soon became 4 or 5, and I took the job on kind of permanently and developed that diploma course. But the training of apprentices, whilst there was satisfaction in that, it wasn't really where I wanted to go. I wanted to develop my own self and my own thoughts and the progression of farriers, and be able to try and offer them the benefits of the experience that I'd had in the late 80s, early 90s of being involved in clinical research and being a part of that veterinary science team trying to understand the nature of the foot and the effects of farriery on it. So with a friend of mine, Neil Madden at FWCF, we approached the college and developed what is now the BSc Honours Degree Programme, which we then got the University of Central Lancashire to validate and cross-match it to the fellowship. So we were able to then offer farriers the opportunity of being involved in some clinical research in an aspect that interested them in particular, that had something to do with their own practice, but at the same time give them the crossover skills that come from a recognised educational programme. One of the problems with farriery is that the risks to your health are quite great, and although it's a practical orientated job, we don't necessarily as a group develop the academic and educational skills that cross over into other areas of life, which degree training does. it gives you the skills to analyse and to be able to write and report, and all of those skills cross over into all sorts of walks of life. So that was the motivation for the degree course, which was originally validated with the help of and the cooperation of the Worshipful Company. And so from there, that made me go back and look at the project that I'd originally started, this pre-navicular syndrome. And I wanted to be able to take that original concept, that original hypothesis, and explore that in depth based on my now broader understanding of the academic requirements of doing that type of research. So that's basically the history of where I got to
before.
By 2010.
Right, okay.
Which was when I was then fortunate enough, because of my time at Liverpool, to be able to get two very eminent vets, Stephen May and Derek Nottenbelt, to sponsor me in terms of being able to do a PhD research program through the University of Liverpool. Now, because I didn't have academic qualifications, the program that I went on was a 6-year program with what they call an MPhil upgrade. So basically I had to do the first 2 years producing a master's degree, and then if that was satisfactory, they allowed the work then to continue on to finish the PhD. And the PhD was based on an understanding of hoof morphology, in other words the changes in the hoof shape and its relationship to specific foot related pathologies such as navicular disease, etc., etc.
So I'm actually holding Mark's PhD here, and you can see he's put some work into it. He's dedicated many years in getting this to where it is now. So, but I just want to ask you your opinions on how farriery has progressed, or how it's changed since when you started back when you were in the army and you were looking for that, and how well, maybe even the equine industry has changed, like how we are using horses, and how it's the importance of what you've done throughout your career in studying and all the research you've done in laminitis, navicular, and now your biomechanical understanding of the horse. How has farriery changed throughout that time?
Well, I think that farriery at the moment is undergoing a total metamorphosis from a purely practical skill-based trade to becoming a profession based more on knowledge and understanding, and a more commercial realization of the practicalities of dealing with the modern day horse and its use and requirements. Certainly since 2001-2002, during the episode of the foot and mouth in this country, the use of horses has changed dramatically. Back in, even then, 2001-2002, lots of horses were being hacked out on the roads, general pleasure riding, and a bit of mixed disciplines, a little dressage lesson on Tuesday, hunting on Wednesday, etc., etc. But the confinement that came about and the restrictions that came about during the foot and mouth period and the subsequent time after that kind of focused owners' attention more on riding at home, and so now they've got more home-based facilities. Most of them have got arenas. They tend to concentrate more on one discipline rather than being multidisciplined. So what we're seeing now is a different set of biomechanically related problems that relate to increased stress or strain brought about by this constant need to keep riding the horse in this one discipline, and the change in the surfaces in which it interacts. And I'll come back to the surfaces thing probably later, but they've had a huge effect on some of the pathologies that these horses get, and the discovery and diagnosis of hitherto unknown conditions, suspensory ligament desmitis, collateral ligament desmitis, basically all stress and repetitive strain injuries. Those are the issues that we're dealing with currently, whereas previously we were, where horses were kind of multidisciplined, or they were focused on one discipline, they had a rest period. So they worked for 3 or 4 months quite hard doing that discipline, and then they were turned out, and then the next horse came in for the next program. So they had, owners had a horse for hunting that they used in the winter, a horse for showing that they used in the spring, and maybe a dressage horse or something. So, but now owners have got one horse and they expect it to do everything. So there's no time off, no time to recover and recuperate, and the strains that are placed on them are repetitive and constant. So that's...
And also in the sort of competitive side of horse ownership, you know, they're always sort of pushing these horses, you know, they're wanting to, everyone seems to be a bit more competitive. They want to get the most out of these horses, and they're pushing them to the limits where
way beyond their, in some cases, way beyond their natural athletic capability.
And we've got some specimens here that Mark's going to go over in a little while, just to show you some of the cases. And I was quite lucky to go and see a horse with Mark yesterday. We worked on a horse that was showing some real hoof morphology, real sort of toe migration, pulling them heels, making them heels sort of low, underrun heels, really distorting the hoof capsule, and it all comes down to the forces that this horn, or you know, all these soft tissue structures are undergoing. So what we've done is we've made a couple of specimens here, and Mark's going to go over it in a little while, just to try and highlight sort of what's actually happening, why it's happening, and then the considerations we need to make, and the tools that we've got to actually highlight what it is that's happening. We've got contour gauges here where we can see what the hoof is actually telling us in order to offer the correct sort of trimming protocol or shoeing protocol, whatever you go about. We'll go into that in a little while. Okay guys, so I'm going to leave it there for the first part of this video. So I really hope you're enjoying it and you're going to come back for part 2. I'll try and get the second part of this interview up later in the week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested in Mark's thesis and you'd like to purchase it, I'll drop links into the description below of where you can get it from. I'll also drop some links, and you can also head over to www.alexridgeway.com/shop, and you can find some of the things like contour gauges, calipers, any of those molds that you've seen in the video today. And soon to come, there will be more products similar to that, along with how to actually make your own molds, all them sorts of things. So be sure to check them out when they come up. But I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Be sure to come back for part 2. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Check out Mark's YouTube channel also, and I'll see you on another video. Take it easy.